Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling, well, a really complex and frankly pretty heavy topic, Ukraine's commercial surrogacy industry.
Yeah, it's intricate.
Hmm.
And what's really striking, I think, is how this industry is persisting, even thriving, you could say, right in the middle of the war.
Exactly. It's not just ticking over, it seems to be operating, growing even. We're talking about a system where Ukrainian women are paid, compensated, to carry and deliver babies for foreign clients.
Primarily foreign, yes.
Okay.
And the scale is, well, it's significant.
It really is. I saw a figure valued at over $14 billion back in 2022 and supposedly growing at something like 25% a year. That's huge.
Astonishing growth, yeah.
And you, our listener, actually sent us a really insightful article, Ukraine's war zone surrogacy industry. That piece is kind of central to our discussion today.
It is. So our goal here for this deep dive is really to get under the skin of this.
Yeah.
Why Ukraine? What are the ethical dimensions, especially now with the war? And what does the future even look like?
Okay, so let's start at the beginning then. How did Ukraine become such a major player in this global surrogacy market? What happened?
Well, it really started gaining momentum in the early 2000s. A key piece, really the key piece, was Ukraine's legal situation around surrogacy.
How so? Less restrictive than other places.
Exactly. Compared to countries like, say, India or Thailand, which eventually brought in bans or much tighter controls, Ukraine's laws were, relatively speaking, quite permissive.
Permissive in what way?
They didn't put heavy restrictions on who the intended parents could be, their nationality, marital status, that kind of thing. It opened the door much wider. Plus, the laws offered a certain clarity that was attractive internationally.
Okay. Clear laws, wider access. That makes sense. And I assume cost was a big driver, too.
Oh, absolutely. A massive factor. You're looking at maybe $30,000 to $50,000 for the whole process in Ukraine.
Which sounds like a lot, but compared to the U.S.
Exactly. In the U.S., you could easily be looking at over $100,000, sometimes significantly more. So for intended parents from North America, Europe, the savings are substantial.
And Ukraine's location probably helps, too, for Europeans anyway.
Definitely. Easier to travel to than some other potential destinations. So you have affordability, accessibility, and relatively straightforward laws driving that demand side.
Right. But then there's the other side of the coin, the women actually acting as surrogates. Why Ukraine? What's motivating them?
And this is where you really have to look at Ukraine's economic reality. The GDP per capita is around $4,800 this year. That points to, well, widespread economic hardship, especially outside the major cities.
So the money offered for surrogacy becomes incredibly significant.
Hugely significant. We're talking payments of maybe $10,000 to $20,000 per pregnancy. For many women, that can be several times what they might earn in a year, maybe more.
Wow. So it's potentially life-changing money.
It can be, yes. A way to improve their family situation, maybe get out of debt, a path out of really difficult circumstances for some.
Though that figure, $10,000 to $20,000, it's still only a fraction of what the intended parents are paying overall, isn't it? The article touched on that.
That's a crucial point. The agencies, the clinics, they act as the intermediaries, managing the process, and yes, they take a very significant cut of the total fee.
Which has led to criticism, I imagine.
It has. You see discussions online, on X, for instance, using terms like baby export hub. It really draws attention to the commercial aspect and where the money is flowing.
A global marketplace for babies, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay, so this industry is established, growing, and then February 2022 happens, full-scale invasion. You'd think that would just stop everything.
You would think so.
Yeah.
But what's quite remarkable is the industry's resilience. Its ability to adapt has been, well, surprising.
How have they adapted?
Agencies found ways to continue. One example that got mentioned online and in that article you shared, Biotexcom, a big agency in Kyrgyzstan, they actually built bomb shelters.
Bomb shelters specifically for the pregnant surrogates.
Yes.
That image is powerful.
Yes.
And deeply unsettling at the same time.
It really is. It's this paradox, isn't it? On one level, it's about protecting vulnerable people in a horrific situation, but on another level,
It speaks volumes about the commodification involved, protecting the product.
some critics would certainly frame it that way. It highlights how, even in the midst of war, the process continues, and ensuring the pregnancy reaches term is paramount. It even becomes a sort of morbid selling point for the agencies. We have shelters.
And the war itself, I mean, it must have made potential surrogates even more vulnerable, surely.
Tragically, yes. Think about it. Displacement, people losing their homes, their jobs, economic collapse. These conditions can make the financial incentive of surrogacy seen even more necessary, perhaps pushing women towards it out of desperation.
And the logistics must have been a nightmare. Parents trying to get in, babies stuck.
Absolutely. Huge complications. Intended parents struggled to travel, borders closed intermittently, legal processes got delayed. There were reports back in 2022 of clinics basically housing dozens of newborns.
Just waiting for their parents. Heartbreaking.
Very much so. And yet, through all this, the agencies kept operating, adapting, finding ways, arguably capitalizing on the fallout from the war.
Because the economic hardship potentially creates a larger pool of women considering this.
That's the grim logic, yes. The economic devastation could inadvertently fuel the supply side of the industry, meeting that persistent global demand.
Which brings us squarely to the ethical concerns. Exploitation seems like the elephant in the room here.
It's central to the debate, absolutely. The core argument from critics is that the industry inherently preys on economic vulnerability.
Because the women need the money so badly.
Precisely. And the fact that they receive, a relatively small percentage of the total fee paid by the intended parents, that disparity is often highlighted. Some ex-posts called the pay shockingly low in context.
And there were mentions of women doing this multiple times.
Yes, reports of women undergoing, say, 3, 4, even 5 surrogacy journeys just to stay afloat financially. That pattern really questions how voluntary the choice truly is. Is it a free choice or one driven purely by economic necessity?
Beyond the money, what about the contracts, the control?
That's another layer. The agreements often heavily favor the agencies and the intended parents. They can stipulate a lot about the surrogate's lifestyle during pregnancy, medical choices.
Dictating their lives, essentially.
To a significant degree, yes. And sometimes even outlining requirements for emotional detachment from the baby. Then there are the reports about surrogates living in shared housing, sometimes called baby factories, in those online discussions, under close supervision. That raises serious questions about autonomy.
And the war just throws all of this into even sharper relief. Those bomb shelters, for instance.
Exactly. Are they purely protective, or are they also a tool of control, a way to ensure the contract is fulfilled, perhaps even a marketing tactic? It really complicates the ethical picture.
And you see that reflected in the criticism online, accusations of exploitation by wealthier nations.
Yes, quite explicitly. Terms like West's surrogacy hub pop up, framing it as richer countries taking advantage of Ukraine's situation. It points to that global power imbalance.
So it's clear the demand from the West is the engine driving this. People from countries where it's illegal, restricted, or just incredibly expensive.
That's the primary driver, yes. Affluent individuals, same-sex couples who face legal barriers elsewhere, single parents. Ukraine became an accessible option for many who couldn't pursue surrogacy easily in their home countries.
There was that stark description in one ex-post, wasn't there? Clinics full of Ukrainian women carrying babies, contracted out to Western clients, often wealthy men.
Yes, highlighting that stark global inequality right there in the clinic waiting room. It paints a very clear picture.
And the war hasn't really dented that demand.
It seems not significantly. The fundamental desire for children is incredibly strong, and the cost difference remains a huge factor.
And the agencies are actively managing their image, getting media coverage.
They are. Biotexcom, for example, has been featured in major outlets like the New York Times. They're visible.
But as you mentioned, some critics see that coverage differently.
Right. Some argue it can glorify the industry, potentially glossing over the harsher realities and the potential for exploitation. It raises questions about which narrative gets told.
And maybe the Ukrainian government, dealing with a war, isn't prioritizing strict oversight.
That's certainly been suggested. Given the economic contributions, however controversial, there might be less political will for a crackdown, especially now.
So looking forward, it feels like a really uncertain future for this industry in Ukraine.
Extremely uncertain. The war casts a long shadow. We hear about some agencies maybe relocating, moving operations to safer regions or even other countries, like Georgia perhaps.
But the economic devastation might keep the supply going.
That's the paradox. The very hardship caused by the war could push more women towards surrogacy, potentially sustaining the industry within Ukraine, assuming it remains operationally feasible.
And that global demand isn't going away.
Not likely, no. As long as there's demand for affordable surrogacy and Ukraine can provide it, it will probably remain a key destination, provided the conflict doesn't completely destabilize things.
What about regulation? Is there any push for more control?
There are some legal protections on paper for surrogates, but enforcement seems to be a major issue. Add corruption into the mix, and effective regulation becomes really challenging.
And resistance from the industry itself.
Oh, definitely. Agencies, intended parents, there's significant pushback against tighter controls or bans. It's an established industry with strong vested interests.
Though the calls for oversight are getting louder too, people using strong terms online.
Yes, terms like human trafficking are being used by some critics on platforms like X, really dialing up the urgency for international scrutiny and regulation.
So it leaves us with this incredibly difficult picture, an industry managing to function, even grow amidst a brutal war, fueled by poverty and desperation on one side, and deep desire and relative wealth on the other.
It's a stark intersection of global economics, personal desires, and extreme vulnerability, all playing out under the most challenging circumstances imaginable.
And that image you mentioned earlier, pregnant women in bomb shelters carrying babies for foreign clients, it just stays with you.
It really does. It encapsulates the whole dilemma.
It forces you to ask, doesn't it? Is this kind of baby factory model, as some call it, is it sustainable? Is it ethically defensible? Especially in a world grappling with such inequality and conflict. Something profound to reflect on, thinking about economics, ethics, and just basic human vulnerability. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.